Hello, folks. Welcome back. It's Iconic with Kanthan Pillay and Chris. How's it going there, Kanthan? What's the word on your side of the world? Is South Africa really collapsing, or is it all just a myth?
We're not going to use particular words, including the word that begins with Geno, because I understand that YouTube is giving strikes to people who even so much as mention it.
Yeah, no, they're definitely putting markers and such. I refuted that term and said it was rubbish and attributed it to left-wing politicians and media outlets who are the ones running around. By the way, let's get right into it. I mean, this is something I've talked to with many of my guests recently. We haven't had a chance to chat. In fact, we didn't get a chance to link up when I was in South Africa. My apologies for that, but the meet and greets were insane. You know, I was doing 4 and 5 hour long meet and greets, answering questions for 5 hours, and I don't get paid for that. It was quite brutal.
Sure, but it all adds up, and that's the reason why you're going to be hitting 100,000 subscribers pretty soon, right?
Am I really? It seems painful. It's like extracting a molar. It's been dragging on for days here, but we are on the verge. We need less than 400 to get to 100,000. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, but you know the saying goes that 95% of the project takes 5% of the time. The last 5% takes the other 95%.
Yeah, that's
that's the situation where you are right now. Yeah.
No, it's funny you should say that because, you know, I labored trying to bring the truth and analysis and my viewpoint for years. And I did this with an original channel that was removed. I think you know that. It was illegitimately removed. Then after that evil CEO left YouTube, they restored my channel 2 years later. But they still got, a shadow ban on it. So with 20+ thousand subscribers, I get like 100 views on a video. Started this channel, and for 2 years and 8 months, I went up to 20,000 subscribers finally by the end of December. And I said, you know what, this is never going to be anything big. That's fine. People rely on me to give my analysis and news, so I'll keep doing that. And then Nobbs Mkhize went on a FlySAF air flight and said, I'm an ANC. And when she said that, I made a video, and I had stopped making the prepared videos because it wasn't getting many views. It was a lot of effort, So I made a video, and I got like 50,000 views. I'm like, wow, people are watching. So I started making them, and then it took off. And then Trump was about to come in office again. I said, well, people are going to be curious about Trump, especially in South Africa. So I started making more videos, and it took off. And then that February 7th refugee thing. And I've gone from 3.4 million views after 2 years and 8 months by the end of December to over 21 million views today. Jeez, it's crazy.
That's flippin' brilliant. But you managed to straddle that particular divide that no one else has really been touching on, which is the interface between the US and South Africa and the rest of the world. And I think that's actually an important niche to be filling out.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Listen, you fill a lot of niches. I think a lot of people aren't even aware of all the things you do. I don't want to go in here and do some promotion to Kanthan Pillay, but I think people should know that you're a treasure to South Africa and you do an awful lot for the country.
Well, look, before we get into the meat of this stuff, I just want to touch on, when we came to this conversation, you asked what I'd been doing during the course of the day. And just to put this in perspective, I have this occasional, every 2 weeks, I have a discussion with my good friend Jonathan Witt, and we talk about a range of things on the Overton podcast. And one of the things that I said in terms of the last discussion that we had was I cited a figure, and I said that it's my view that if we did not have the economic cost of implementing broad-based black economic empowerment, there would be a 2 percentage point uptick in terms of the South African economy. And a very good friend of mine then, gave me a call and said, I just want to find out, where'd you get that figure from? And I said, well, it's a thumbsuck. And he was furious. He said, how can you thumbsuck stuff like that? And I said, well, it's an educated guess. I'm making an informed decision with incomplete information. And I guarantee you that if I go and actually wade through the data, I'll be more than able to actually justify it. And so the argument got to be quite heated. And I said, well, tell you what, I'm actually going to crunch the numbers and I'm going to put it all together. And so I did that today. So, for people who have enough patience to go through lots of data without their eyes glazing over, they can look at kanthanpillay.com and find it there. But to cut a long story short, Chris, the figures do in fact bear out what I said, that the uptick in GDP can range between 2% to 5%.
Yep. Well, I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that at all. I mean, I did a thumbsuck myself, but I looked at a little bit of data, and just look at the impact. And my estimation was somewhere in that range. I don't think I went as high as 5%, but that's awesome. I'm glad you did the research, and it bears it out. I mean, this is a heavy burden on South Africa, what's being imposed here. And there's also ways we can't really quantify and catch in the data. For instance, the number of aspiring entrepreneurs who are dissuaded or discouraged, who don't even bother, who could have come into the marketplace and created jobs, but for the requirement for BE. I mean, I don't even know how you capture that.
What you're saying is actually a very important point, because one of the things that I touched on, and there are substantial studies backing this up, is that the impact on large businesses on turnover is between 1.5 to 3%. On small businesses, the impact is far more substantial, because they have the initial fixed costs of BE compliance. So for businesses that have a turnover of more than 50 million rand a year, it's between 1.5 to 3%. But it's the small guys who really end up paying the price, which obviously directly impacts on the creation of new businesses. It directly impacts on whether or not people are investing into the country. And it's a fustercluck of note.
I like how you twisted that word around, because in the military we like to say Charlie Foxtrot a lot, and that's not the most polite term. But it's interesting, because this is where government's not your friend. Now, this is my view, Kanthan. I suspect we share a similar view. The role of government is to ensure a level playing field. It's not to promote winners or losers. It's to ensure that you have a right of redress when someone cheats you in business, so that you have courts that are legitimate, that are functional, that are responsive, so you can take someone to court and sue them if necessary. It's also to ensure that people are complying with things that are necessary for public safety, and to ensure that no one gets an unfair monopolistic advantage or something like that. But big business loves law. They can hire attorneys and certified public accountants and chartered public accountants, and they can comply with all these things. They just push the cost on the consumer because they have such a high revenue. But a small startup, a small mom and pop business, a small business with a few employees, they have to keep costs at a minimum. And they're the ones that are most heavily impacted by regulation. Here in the States, we had Sarbanes-Oxley, which was a ridiculous response to some accounting shenanigans by multinational firms, not by small businesses. And it put an undue compliance burden on small firms. And then we had others, Sarbanes-Oxley. There's other ones that came into play. It's the same thing in South Africa. BEE puts an undue burden, never mind the immorality of giving somebody equity just because of their skin color, but it puts an undue burden on aspiring entrepreneurs and small businesses, which is the lifeblood of healthy economies. Look at the German Mittelstand and look at the United States. Our job growth, while we have companies that have 300,000, 500,000 employees, the real job growth comes at startups and small businesses. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, if you drill down into all of the other compliance regulations that one has to deal with in the South African context, that figure actually goes up quite substantially. So, I've often spoken about the fact that the way in which you unlock the economy of South Africa, you first get rid of broad-based black economic empowerment. You then get rid of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. You then get rid of the Labor Relations Act, and then you get rid of minimum wage. And if you do all four of those things, we will easily post 7% economic growth in this country.
Yeah, which is what you need. You need a minimum of 6.5% GDP growth year on year for at least 10 to 15 years just to catch up with the backlog in poverty to get a good start.
For sure, because the basic issue that we have to deal with is that we currently projected to do 1.4% growth in this year ahead, and we have population growth that is more than that. So in other words, the country is getting poorer.
Well, in fact, that's what I've talked about. The stupidity of not having a trade representative here in the United States to work out a tariff with the U.S., a bilateral agreement, because AGOA is dead. Congress is not renewing it, and they keep talking about AGOA. They're idiots. They don't want to pay attention. But instead of taking advantage of the 90 days that Trump gave to countries, they still haven't sent him. Mcabezi Jonas is still not in the United States. He's a special envoy. There's no ambassador here. There's no one negotiating with the U.S. to get these tariffs under control. And the reason I mention this is that we don't need America. Well, now they're begging the South African government for $2.4 billion in research grants for UCT and roads and places because USAID is not funding it anymore. So your research is falling apart. Your automotive sales have cratered by 40% to the US because of the tariffs going up. And that's just a 10% tariff. And on top of that, 4 to 5% of your entire GDP, $20 billion, is tied directly to two-way trade with the US. So with a population that's in excess of GDP growth, with inflation in excess of GDP growth, the last thing South Africa needs is to lose 5% of its GDP in trade with the U.S. But they're whistling past the cemetery, Kanthan. It's insane.
Well, you see, you have these idiots in the halls of power right now, in Parliament, who say things like, well, actually, China is our biggest trading partner. And then you have to stop and explain to these numbnuts that we have a trade deficit with China. We have a trade surplus with the US. And what that means is that South Africa benefits directly from trade with the United States to a far greater extent than trade with China.
Yeah, and there's
trade. It's a net positive for South Africa.
Well, but
trade with the U.S.
But it's even better than that. And I think we both know that, Kanthan. I don't mean to steal your thunder, but a lot of people don't realize the benefication of the trade. You know, you're sending raw coal to China. It's a commodity. Commodity prices spike; they go up and down based on demand. You're sending steel, not steel. You can have big steel. You're sending iron. You're sending commodities basically to China. They're sending industrialized finished goods to Africa, and they're cheap consumer goods. Meanwhile, you're making the parts for Fords and for BMWs all over South Africa. That's a whole ecosystem in the economy, and all the stuff that supports the families, the businesses, the restaurants, the retail stores, the rents, all the utilities, all that. And all that car and trucks get built in South Africa, then shipped to America. All of that value-added chain is in South Africa. The value added to those goods, those raw materials that go to China, is benefiting China, not South Africa.
More to the point, it's non-renewable.
Oh, that too.
It out of the ground.
You've extracted it, it's gone.
And we've extracted, it's gone, and it's depleted. Whereas the stuff that we're currently providing to the U.S., well, there are some minerals that we export to the U.S.
But not much. 430 million.
Well, yeah. But I think, like we're the biggest provider of manganese to the U.S. as an example, and chrome is another one where we're fairly high up the food chain. But fundamentally, the point is that with regard to our trade with China, eventually we're going to run out of those natural resources.
Yeah.
And then it's pretty much game over in terms of our economy.
Exactly. In fact, those resources should be staying in South Africa to make the benefication up the value-added chain and get the profit there. But no, it's, they're not very bright people. They think that kowtowing to Tehran and carrying the water for them over Gaza is going to ensure something. But I'm sorry, Kanthan, maybe I missed the headlines in South Africa. With the loss of the $500 million in annual handouts that the U.S. has been giving to South Africans, $430 to $500 million a year. Which of the BRICS countries have stepped forward to fill that gap? Was it Brazil? Was it China? Was it India? Was it Russia? I mean, they've all rushed forward because it's now been since February 7th since Trump canceled that aid. So, I mean, March, April, May, it's 4 months. And they brought money, right? The BRICS have brought money, right?
Well, Chris, to be fair, the EU has offered to step in and fill the gap.
Promised. Loans, not grants.
Absolutely, loans, not grants.
Look, I'll loan people money, and I'll do it at 15% interest because you have junk bond status. I mean, come on. I mean, these people are dumb as a box of rocks. I had a conversation with Neil de Beer when I was in Cape Town. Neil and I sat down. One of the first people I sat down with when I got there. Neil's been inside. He was inside the whole thing with the ANC. He was, he's cop during the old regime and spied for MK. And so he was at ANC for a long time. They left the ANC, and he's made a lot of people in the ANC happy about that because he exposed them. And I said, Neil, what's the deal here? I mean, I don't understand the end game. I'm trying to understand the end game. I'm just trying to be, modest here. I said, do they not get it? I mean, do they not understand that they claim they're not doing anything to harm America, but every time you turn around, they insult America. They say stupid things. They send an ambassador, calls the president the leader of a global white supremacist movement on a recorded session. I mean, how stupid is that? And I said, are they doing this intentionally, or are they just that dumb? And Neil said, Chris, they're just that stupid.
Unfortunately, it's the only conclusion that one is forced to draw, because again, there's supposed to be this demarcation between what a political party says and what people in government say, and you actually have to wear different hats. You can express particular views in terms of the context of a political party, and when you are actually sitting in office, you're actually, at that point, expected to represent the country and do what's in the best interest of the country. And the problem that we've had is that for the past 30 years, the separation between the party and the state machinery has not been there. So for the first time now, where we've actually got a government that, the purported government of national unity, but there's this insistence on the part of the ministers who belong to the government of national unity from the ANC side to still speak wearing their ANC hats. Now, astonishingly, the flip side is that the DA ministers are not speaking wearing their DA hats, which, again, is really getting a lot of us incredibly upset, because there are so many things that this government is currently doing that is completely out of step with what the DA's policies are supposed to be. And, no doubt you've seen the footage of Dean McPherson standing glassy-eyed next to the president while the president reiterates his support for all of the failed ANC policies, and not so much as a raised eyebrow in response to that kind of thing. But so I guess what I'm trying to say, Chris, is that the stupidity is not confined to particular political parties. It does seem to be something that kind of crosses all of these lines currently. But it really does come back to those basics of not understanding economics, not understanding the global stage, and more crucially, not understanding that the world right now is doing a complete and utter reset. And a lot of the stuff that all of these guys have believed in is being ripped apart at the seams. Are they going to actually wake up to this soon enough to say, actually, we need to have a change in course? Or at very least, we need to just zip our lips until such time as there's eventually a change of government in the US that tilts back in the other direction, which, will probably happen in another decade or so.
That's a long time to go.
I can't see it happening. Yeah,
no, I can't see it happening either. I agree 100%. But let me talk a little bit about Dean McPherson, since you happen to mention him. Dean McPherson from the Democratic Alliance, which made a line in the sand, a red line that shall not be crossed on expropriation without compensation. To be fair, it was approved by the previous parliament, and they voted against it. But it just shows how little influence that the DA has with the president of South Africa, that their party leader, who's also a cabinet member, couldn't convince the president not to sign this abomination of legislation. And then Dean McPherson has the audacity to try to carry the Lutuli House party line. Nil is a form of compensation. Now, again, I've told my audience, I don't know Dean McPherson personally, but when I see the name Dean and McPherson, I think of an Anglophone. Therefore, someone that should be able to speak English clearly and understand the word nil, which means zero, nothing, nix, nine, yet, not in the Bahnhof. So, compensation is to give somebody something in exchange for something else. I believe that's what the description of the word is in many dictionaries, the Oxford, the Webster's dictionary. So how can you give somebody nothing in exchange for something? That is not compensation. He had the audacity to say that, but what really torqued me off is a friend of mine's mother and stepfather were brutally assaulted in a farm attack in Brits last week. It was reported as a house robbery. I have the police report. We've exposed how the government covers this up. And in the aftermath of that, McPherson goes to an event with Ramaphosa a few days ago in which Ramaphosa mocks President Trump and laughs about, oh, they're turning the lights down. I thought they were doing a Trump on me. And McPherson cackles and laughs because he thinks it's funny. Now, it wasn't a funny moment. An appropriate response would have keep his face stone-faced. Let Ramaphosa be the fool. But McPherson is part and parcel of this nonsense, this failed government of national unity, which, as you said, the DA ministers are doing their job as members of the cabinet, but they certainly aren't upholding the principles of the Democratic Alliance. And I think a lot of South Africans are angry. I tell you, when I did that Oval Office live broadcast with Trump, and by the way, I had popcorn too. I was eating popcorn, a big basket of popcorn when I was watching it. But when I did that, you should have seen, I had 14,600 people, and almost to the man and woman, every one of them that was a DA supporter, over 10,000 people said, I'm done. I'm never voting DA again. Now, it's a long time to miss elections. People will change their minds, but people are really angry and hurtful at where the DA is. And Dean McPherson's behavior is shocking in my mind. I don't know your thoughts, if you want to comment or not.
I think that's pretty much been the case in most of the DA representatives in the government of national unity. To give Helen Zille some credit, she has not been walking that particular line. But obviously she's not in government. And one would expect that certainly the likes of Steenhuisen would actually be pointing out to Ramaphosa that we are not here at your behest, even though you may say that. We are here as partners in this government, and we have our individual standpoints. But clearly, at the point at which they negotiated the framework for the GNU, the idea of handing over control of foreign affairs to the ANC was utterly disastrous. And it probably is the single most critical thing that one needs to be taking a look at right now, particularly, as you say, in the context of what's going down in terms of our relationship with Iran and our relationship with Israel and what's kind of happening at the world in the world at large. Just to be clear on this point, I very much want a peaceful resolution of the situation with Iran. And I think that certainly the Trump administration is on track to achieving something that is going to ring-fence Tehran's nuclear ambitions, which is a good thing, and more importantly, then allow for creation of a secure and stable Middle East, which is in everyone's interests. And right now, the way in which South Africa is engaging with that process, the best possible thing that this country could be doing right now is to actually step back and say, we need to see where this actually plays out and actually give both sides room to complete these negotiations. And that's the point at which we then resume our engagement with it. But that's absolutely not happening at all. South Africa is doubling down at so many levels. And to your earlier point, it's completely out of step with the country's partners in BRICS. Because Trump has a direct line to Russia, he has a direct line to China, he has an excellent relationship with Modi in India, and his relationship with Lula in Brazil is also very good. So there are all of these open channels right now between the U.S. government and the BRIC countries, and South Africa, again, is out of step with it.
Yeah, I agree 100%. They really are out of step. So let me ask this question. You guys, of course, your program is called the Overton Podcast. And folks, if you want to check it out, I just realized I have the alert thing on. Let me turn that off because that's distracting. It's over your head there. It looks like you've got a zombie crawling across your head, so we have to fix that. But your program is called the Overton Podcast. Has the Overton window shifted with Donald Trump's 7 February executive order and his suspension of aid, and now Ronnie Jackson calling for a review of the relationship, which was done last year, but it failed in Congress? Has the Overton window shifted? Are we looking at something new happening? I tell you one thing that's happening, which the government denies. South Africa is being bled of its human capital because all of these unemployed car guards have been arriving in America for the past 2 weeks. Thank you very much. We appreciate the unemployed car guards who also know how to code, farm. They're agronomists. They're business people. So thank you so much for those car guards. They're really, really going to be good for America's society. By the way, the Colored who came over, we appreciate the Colored family as well. And the Indians and the Coloreds who will be coming over in future plane loads. Thank you so much. We appreciate that, Cyril. But South Africa is definitely being bled dry of its human capital once again.
Well, the point that people don't touch on, Chris, and again, it's because we don't drill down into the numbers and we just wait for these flags that get put up by the mainstream media in this country. If you do a calculation over the past 5-year period, there's an average of 74 people per day who are migrating from South Africa to the rest of the world. Economic migrants, with or without refugee programs. So all of this brouhaha around 49 people going across on this special program that the U.S. administration has put together completely ignores the fact that intellectually and economically we are being bled dry based on the fact that people actually recognize that they'd rather be going and working in countries where the currency that they're going to be earning is immediately going to be increasing their value by an order of magnitude.
Well, 100%
Literally.
on that. No, you're absolutely right about that. And not just that, but the one of the biggest reasons is opportunity, of course. People now, 4% of white males can be in upper management based on new regulations that are coming out for labor laws. I mean, what kind of nonsense is that? What happened to merit? If you don't fix things by perpetuating a racist system that discriminates against people, just picking different losers. You fix
Chris, I've got to
things.
say on that point though, it's 4% for white males.
Yeah.
It's even lower. It's
Oh,
even
for
lower
Indians.
for my tribe.
Oh, I know.
It's even lower for my tribe. Yep.
I know you got less than 1%. I think it is around 1%.
Yep.
Yeah. It's which
Yeah.
isn't even reflective of your percentage population. It's more than 1%. Yeah, no, it's horrific. No, it's a good point, Kanthan. But I'm always stand up for the Indians, dude. I'm always stand up for the Indians. I've got some Indian viewers, thank goodness. But it's looks. You fix the historical wrongs by investing in places that are needed, like community policing and justice and education. But instead, all of that has gone completely wrong and backwards for the past 30 years. I mean, who in their right mind thinks it's a good idea to lower educational standards to convince a high school graduate leaving high school that getting 38% in mathematics is a passing grade? And now you go out in the workforce with an expectation. I have a diploma. I'm employable. You're functionally illiterate. You're not employable. You're not helping anybody with that. Instead of that nonsense, so they can keep numbers high, saying, well, look at all the graduates who've matriculated. Yeah, we got all these matrics. No, you don't. You've got functionally illiterate people, and you want to put 1 million people into subsistence farming when you should be focusing on the fourth industrial revolution, coding, genetics, gene splicing, pharmaceuticals. I mean, this is stupid beyond belief. This is a 1930s Stalin-esque mindset of how economics works. What have I missed?
Well, what you've missed is the fact that actually government has no business doing any of those things, even though they.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree. I did say the job is okay. Hang on, I did say it's the level playing field is all they're responsible for. Remember that.
Well, you see, what I'm saying is that it's not the role of government to be sorting out the fourth industrial revolution. It is the role of government to be getting out of the way so that people who understand the fourth industrial revolution can actually get down to implementing it, as opposed to currently hobbling it, which is the situation that we've got in terms of the way in which the South African government works. I'll give you a very good example of the way in which this should actually be playing itself out. And I'll use the example of Denmark. Okay, and as you know, Denmark has horrendous tax rates. Okay, it's something like 70% is what you end up paying.
For the top tax rate, yep, absolutely.
Correct, yeah, 70% is what you end up paying in the top tax rate. Now, just imagine in the South African scenario, you set the economy free, okay, and allow business to absolutely flourish, and then put in place a high tax rate. And then you're able to take that tax money and then actually plow it back into doing the type of thing that you are suggesting that government should be doing. But the reason why they won't do that, Chris, and I'm very clear about this, is because if they do that, the tax that gets raised has to go through a parliamentary deployment process, which means that the comrades are not able to eat. And that's why we are in this mess where we are right now, because you put in place all of these regulatory hurdles and the burden of compliance, and the money all gets siphoned off sideways into this catchment zone that eventually feeds back into Luthuli House through Chancellor House. And the country as a whole ends up suffering. You've probably seen the figures during the rounds that said that BEE has effectively benefited 100 people to the tune of R1 trillion.
I did see that.
It's yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I've been arguing for years. I mean, it's those are the biggest beneficiaries, but there has been a class, a coterie of BE tenderpreneurs who've profited immensely as well, but not to that astronomical
Starting
figure.
with the president.
Oh, of course.
Because every business, the supposed successful businessman, Cyril Ramaphosa, every single business that he has succeeded at was handed to him on a plate. There's not a single thing where he has built it up from scratch.
And that's the bottom line here. That's the problem with BEE. One of the biggest problems. You're forced to give equity to people who have no skin in the game, who don't bring skills, who have built nothing, and they're just rent seeking. That's all they're doing. They're rent seeking.
But also the other problem that you have is that when you have those percentage requirements, and if you look in terms of the mining charter, this is a very good example where there's a requirement that you have a 30% ownership. Now, the problem that you have when you get into putting in place those race quotas, let's say that you have a 30% buy-in on the part of a black investor, and that person then wants to sell off.
No, you can't, because you go below 30%. You can't do that.
Yeah, because then you're going to go below 30%. So the only way you're going to be able to profit is by actually selling it to another black person who's going to say, no, actually, I'm not going to buy this because, I'm going to have to pay market price for it and I'm actually not going to benefit.
Yeah.
So the ability of people, and you know this from startups in the US, the idea behind a startup is that you found a company and then what you want to do is to actually have an IPO and sell off a significant chunk of your shareholding in order for you to financially benefit. And we don't have that option. It's utterly absurd.
No, and the absurdities that come along with this. So you have land that's purchased by the government under the willing buyer, willing seller program, millions of hectares the government acquires. Then they give it to recipients, beneficiaries who happen to be black, in most cases. And they can't farm it successfully because there's no extension agents that help them. There's no grants, there's no training, no seed capital. And so they fail unless they get help from their friends and neighbors who are commercial farmers, which does happen on many occasions. But the ones who fail, then they sell their land. If they sell it to a white South African, then we hear the nonsense that the whites still control all the land, which is hideous and stupid. It reminds me of the netball semifinal a couple years ago when a team won the game. It was an exciting game. I kind of like netball. As an American, that's kind of weird, but I kind of caught on to it when I lived in Southern Africa. But, netball. So what happened was a team won, and then immediately whistle after it was blown. They're all jumping up and down on the court, and then they come over and they say, no, the game is forfeited. Why is it forfeited? Because not enough white players were on the court during a certain period in the second half. They had a player who got injured, and the only player available to go in was a black player. So they put the black player in. There were too many blacks on the court. I mean, what? How stupid is this? These are the insanities, the absurdities of race-based legislation and policies. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, and look at the Springboks when they pushed Henneke Meyer. He finally just, they blame it on the loss at Brighton to Japan. Henneke Meyer left the Springboks because he refused to kowtow and play racial quotas, which Alistair Coetzee was happy to do, and he was given a poison chalice. But I mean, the absurdity of this nonsense, basing things on people's skin color, is just brain dead. And again, the government's supposed to ensure level playing field, not tilt and put their hand on the scale, which is what the government does.
And the reason why the government does it is because in so doing, they end up financially benefiting. And, the president's brother-in-law is a case in point when it comes to our energy policy.
Yes, Patrice Motsepe, indeed. I'll mention him by name. I have no problem with that. Listen, folks, you're listening to Iconic with Kanthan Pillay and Chris Wyatt. We have this conversation episodically. We do it occasionally. And Kanthan's a busy guy. I'm busy too. But here we are having this conversation today about the situation in South Africa. I asked a question a while ago and we both went off on a tangent together. So let me come back to it. The Overton window, has it shifted with Trump or is it all the same?
Yes, I think the Overton window has definitely shifted with Trump. Interestingly enough, though, I think that the shift started happening before Trump came around. And I think it started with a couple of places in Europe. So I think Hungary was there. Certainly Czechoslovakia was there. And of course, Serbia has always been kind of playing in that space. But let's go down to Latin America, and certainly Nayib Bukele has been driving that shift. Javier Milei has been driving that shift as well. To a lesser extent, you can take a view in terms of Giorgia Meloni in Italy. To a lesser extent, but
well, she's proven to be not as reliable conservative as I expected.
Quite right, but certainly her view in terms of immigration or migration at large has not shifted. And one of the reasons why she's been held hostage is basically because of the European Court, which has constrained her ability to do what she actually wants to be doing. So I think the shift actually started at that stage. And I also think to a large extent that shift was inspired by the possibility that Trump was going to come into office. And therefore, there would be a significant reduction in terms of the pressure that the collective West at the time was bringing to bear on all of these countries. So, certainly at the time that Milei got elected and immediately began implementing the measures that he was putting out there, and the collective howl of outrage that said that this guy was going to fail, and these false narratives just kept piling on one after the other. And guess what? A short period later, the guy, it turns out that everything that he said was going to happen, in fact, did happen. So, ditto in the case of Bukele. I have a very close friend who works for the State Department who was actually posted to El Salvador for a while, and he said he loves it. The place has now done a complete about face. People are excited about being able to walk the streets at night and all of that kind of fun stuff. So, yeah, to your point, the Overton window has definitely shifted, as it does, historically. There's always the swings and roundabouts, and right now, it is very much on a trajectory towards more, shall we say, people looking out for the best interests of their country first and foremost, rather than being obsessed with this idea of globalization as the way in which the world needs to be going. How long it's going to last, I don't know, because there's lots of forces that are rallying around to try and turn it in the opposite direction.
100%. So, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, I thought we finished. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I was going to say that that Europe right now, collectively, is very much leading the charge in that direction,
pushing back.
Pushing back, and of course, the election of Keir Starmer, who was supposed to fix things in terms of the UK economy, but in fact has dragged that country even more firmly back in the direction of undoing Brexit. So there's lots going on around the world. But I think right now, on the assumption that Trump is able to stave off the lawfare, and you'll probably be able to speak to that far more effectively than I can, but on the assumption that he continues to stave off the lawfare, I think this trajectory is going to continue for the rest of his term. And then going forward, I mean, flip, has he got a strong team on his side? John and I were talking about this on the Overton pod, and look, Vance was always good, but Rubio has kind of come into his own.
He has. I'm very surprised because I didn't think he was very impressive as a senator, but wow, as Secretary of State, he's really stepped up.
Yeah. So, to your point, yes, I think the shift is there, and I'm just keeping fingers crossed. I wanted to continue on that trajectory.
Well, there's a comment here I got to put in very quickly here from Kalpana Soni. Kalpana Soni says, "You two make a great combo. Chris brings the intel, Kanthan brings the spice." Is that a cultural comment because he's Indian? He brings the spice. It's like brains and boldness in one question or one episode. Wait a second. What was one of us have brains? The other one's bold. Okay, it was a compliment, but no, thank you for that. So back to that point that you were just elaborating on. Two things there. There's woke is one thing, but politically, what you're talking about, I think Viktor Orban has been holding that marker in place. He has been the frontline infantry, not budging when the European Union tried to destroy Hungary because their positions in immigration and things like that, putting a fence up a border, protecting their borders and kicking out illegals, much in the face of the European Union, threatening to cut money to them. So he's always held the line. But we saw a series of leftist wackadoodles and hate wankers just fall by the wayside. Some of them pure cowards, like Justin Trudeau in Canada, but we don't see a better result after Justin. But in New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, she left office because she was a coward and knew she was going to get destroyed in the election. And the Conservatives won there. We're seeing a nationalist has won the election in Poland this week. We'll see what happens in South Korea after they got rid of the president for his legal declaration of martial law. You may not agree with it, but it was legal. So politically, you're right. But I think one of the big things you've hit on is Javier Milei's election and all these people attacking him. That guy has been amazing, absolutely amazing. Now, as far as turning the tide in America, which is the linchpin of all this, I believe in the end, it really is. Not just saying that as an American, but where America goes, the world can go. When we went left with Obama and with Biden, the world went that way very quickly. So for us, there were three peak things. People always want to say it was about Elon Musk buying Twitter. No, it wasn't. That was one of them. I say there's three strikes. I use a baseball analogy. The first strike took place in Virginia a few years ago when a high school girl was raped by a transgender male in a bathroom at a Virginia high school. and the school board covered up the rape. Of course, the girl was traumatized. She didn't tell her father she'd been raped, and then she went home. He found out about it. He went to a school board meeting, and he asked them why they covered up his daughter's rape and why weren't the police called. And they just moved that kid to another school. So instead of answering his questions, they had the police escort him out and arrest him for disturbing the public. That was an uproar, an outcry that took place, and as a consequence, Youngkin became the governor of Virginia, beating Terry McAuliffe, a previous governor who was very popular in a purple state. Youngkin is the first Republican in the history of the state of Virginia to win every single county, including the bedroom communities of Loudoun County and along the border with D.C., which are heavily Democratic. He won them as a Republican, every county outright, every single one. That was the first.
So he pulled a Reagan, basically.
Exactly, but he did it on that issue. He did it on parental rights and about this transgender issue, and that was the first strike. That's when woke began to fray, and we began to push back as a society. Until then, people just sat back and watched all this nonsense where California strips parents around the country of their parental rights by saying any kid who escapes and comes to California will be treated as what's the word for it? The minor who is, they're I can't think of the word right now, but they basically, they're independent. They're no longer, their parents have no authority over them. So they're stripping parents of parental rights from other states. Anyway, so that was the first one. The second one was Musk putting together a consortium to buy Twitter. And Twitter went from a hateful, violent, nasty platform where leftists attacked and censored people in the center and the right to a nasty, violent, evil platform where everybody calls everybody names now. So it's a fair, level playing space. And the left hates that because people get to call them out on Twitter, which they didn't get to do before because you'd be censored. And then the third thing is on November 5th, we saved America. And maybe, Kanthan, maybe we saved the world.
Well, certainly in terms of a number of conflicts that are playing themselves out right now, I would go along with that assessment. And, I at the time at which Trump very quickly managed to sort out the conflict between India and Pakistan within the space of a couple of days. And I said, if there's a single thing that Trump has achieved during his presidency, and if he does nothing else during the course of his presidency, this alone is enough to write him into the history books, because it really was that significant. You've got two nuclear-armed neighbors who are on the brink of an all-out war, and Trump wades in there, and over the course of 24 hours, actually persuades them both to back off and enact a truce. And the following week, they're back to playing cricket. That's amazing stuff.
It is amazing stuff, and Trump doesn't get credit for it. In the Abraham Accords, he brought the biggest, most significant peace agreement to the Middle East, and Biden squandered it and destroyed it overnight. And then, of course, they made fun of Trump, saying that he was a fool for giving Kim Jong-un an audience and meeting him in Asia. But something interesting happened. North Korea stopped launching intercontinental ballistic missiles over Japanese airspace after Trump stroked his ego. And he never did it again until Biden came in office. And 2 weeks after Biden came in office, they start launching intercontinental missiles. Now they can reach Alaska and the West Coast because Trump has done amazing things for peace. He ended the war in Iraq. He destroyed ISIS in 4 months, which Obama fostered because of stupidity and his naivety with his foreign policy in the Arab Spring. He ended the war in Afghanistan. For 18 months, there were no combat operations by U.S. troops. We only had troops there to train the Afghans and to provide a credible deterrence so that the Taliban wouldn't simply overrun the government. And then Biden just ruins that. So Trump is a man of peace. He's the only president in my living memory that's ended wars.
And if you look in terms of the speech that he delivered on his Middle East tour, where he was talking about this dramatic reset in terms of the way in which the U.S. engages with that part of the world in particular, and the emphasis on allowing each of those nations to pretty much go their own way, and for the U.S. to not be playing kind of the moral overlord, but to be making use of its trade superiority to engage with those countries and pull them back on track. And if you look back over the course of the first Trump presidency, that's exactly what happened in the case of Saudi Arabia. Because remember, we went from the case of Jamal Khashoggi being chopped up and blended into small bits and all of that kind of stuff, and suddenly you have Saudi Arabia doing a complete about turn in terms of all of the really draconian stuff that used to go down, and it's the very simple things like the dress codes for women. They're not being allowed to drive. Women not being allowed to wear seatbelts, was one of the most outrageous things ever, because, and the reason why they were not allowed to wear seatbelts. It's because it might actually define their cleavage, and, people might get ideas. So they were not allowed to wear all these levels of absurdities. And Trump was basically saying, you guys have your own moral code. We have our own moral code, but we're going to engage with you on the basis of what we do best, and we think you'll see the light. And I think he's correct that, there is a shift that is happening around the world that's actually focused on the idea that one needs to act in the best interests of one's own people, and that the best way to end up doing this is by having these solid trade relationships that are based on mutual gain, not on open trade where, China ends up being the winner and everyone else kind of, scrambles for what's left of the crumbs. So I think in terms of the Middle Eastern context, when Trump pulls off an eventual deal with Iran, and I'm pretty convinced that he will, and it is going to be something that, to my mind, Israel is going to be happy with, because they will be properly ring-fenced, because he's not going to sign off on anything that is going to leave Israel in the doing. And there is an entire nation there in Iran that is waiting for an opportunity to break free of their religious overlords. I'm completely convinced of this. There are some of the smartest people in the world. They're some of the most productive people in the world, and they've been held hostage for 50 years by these unelected religious overlords. So that entire shift, Chris, to your point, is happening, and it's happening because of Trump. And there are people trying to stop it. And they are desperately trying right now to provoke a war in the Middle East. And I think that he's been playing it very well so far. Let's see how it plays out.
Well, I agree with you 100% there. And of course, I think that's the whole reason for the narrative about white Afrikaners and farmers and the lies about, Trump's refugee program, which, as I predicted, strangely enough, not strange, but I predicted that this program would likely be Afrikaners and racial minorities. And son of a gun, that's what the program is. But not one media outlet in South Africa actually emphasized that point, or the fact that there was a color couple that came over with their children in the first batch of 59. So, they're trying to rubbish him with the G stuff all the time. We talked briefly about this, but I think going back to that moment, which was epic, he didn't get Rasuled. That definitely didn't happen to Cyril Ramaphosa. But there were some very telling moments in that conversation. Number one, Trump's body language was very annoyed when Ramaphosa started lecturing him about, the president must listen to South Africans. And I think one of the most poignant moments for me, Kanthan, was like, have you met my white Minister of Agriculture? I mean, that was just comical. I mean, can you imagine Donald Trump in his first administration going, Mr. Ramaphosa, Mr. President, have you met my Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson? Yeah, he's black. Did you know that? We have blackies in our, oh my gosh. Can you imagine? That would still be the headline today. But not one media outlet talked about the bigotry and racism of calling his minister white. I mean, we can see John doesn't have a very good tan. We don't need to be reminded of that. And then for me, the fascinating part of this was he's like when they showed the Normandian protests, which took place in September 2020 after Glenn and Vito Rafferty were murdered in their home and after the Brendan Horner murder, and Trump showed that video, and Ramaphosa's like, Mr. President, have they told you where this is? I've never seen this before. And of course, at the end of that protest is a big banner that was all over the news and social media in South Africa calling out Ramaphosa. But and Trump goes, it's in South Africa.
Chris, that was probably the single most embarrassing part of that entire discussion. And the thing that astonishes me is that all of those crosses can be seen from the N1 freeway. And remember that Cyril Ramaphosa comes from Limpopo province, and if you are driving on the N1 from Polokwane down to Pretoria, which is the way in which Ramaphosa needs to travel if he is ever going to visit his home province, you have to see those crosses.
Well,
They're
I
there.
think we've got it. We're conflating two things. I'll make sure we're clear so people don't misinterpret this. I think you're talking about the Vitkreuz monument by Polokwane. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct,
Well,
yes.
all right. But the video shown was a protest where they erected crosses on both sides of the road in September 2020. It's not the Vitkreuz, and that's one of the problems with South African media where people are conflating these things.
So my understanding is that the crosses that were present at the protest were eventually then stationed.
They represented that. Okay, yeah. So again, that's I'm not trying to correct you, Kanthan, but
Sure.
the Vitkreuz monument pre-existed. It's been there for years. They built crosses which had names on them to represent the crosses that were at the Vitkreuz monument for the Normandy. So that's the full story. But but the only thing is Trump made a mistake saying these are burial mounds. But I mean, they go on about that. Just like the shows all these news articles of all these horrible things happening in South Africa, and one of them has a photograph of something in the Congo, but the story is about Africa with a focus on South Africa from a South African media outlet. And then all these media are like, oh, there's no proof, these videos. But no one's denying that Malema saying that stuff, that Zuma saying that stuff, and then they're trying to rubbish these reports because they're lying about it. But the interesting thing about all that is that what did they expect Trump to show? So here's imagery from our satellite system, the KG-27. You can see we can see things 1 square meter here. So look at this. Let me show you this. Oh, here are the radio intercepts of the people. What, you're going to show classified information in front of the world press? I mean, these people are dumb as a box of rocks, Kanthan, honestly.
Well, and Trump has been on record in the past, telling reporters, that's a stupid question. You can't be asking me that.
But what about this was so tasteless, and the press was so obvious. NBC reporter. So they show that video, and there's a pause, and people are just agog, except of course for Kumbutsu Nshiveni, who sat there with a smirk on her face the whole time. I got to tell you, the guy I was impressed with, I'm not impressed with him as a minister, but I was impressed there was Parks Tao. Parks Tao had a perfect response. He didn't respond. He didn't smirk. He didn't make faces. He was fine. But it's just so when that video was done, then this rude NBC reporter, Mr. President, can you tell to us why you're taking a bribe from Gutter for a Boeing aircraft? Oh, and I love Trump's response. That was brilliant.
Yeah, at the point at which this Trump is misinformed narrative was doing the rounds in the South African press, and I pulled together a blog post that actually detailed all of the various intelligence agencies that report to the office of the president.
There's 19.
And yeah, I had 18 on my list. What have I missed out?
I can't share that.
I see what you did there. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, but basically, the point that I was making, that he gets his information from at least 100,000 to 120,000 civilian and military personnel.
I can neither confirm nor deny that number of intelligence people.
No. That's the public recorded number.
Well, I hear that's the case, but I don't really. I can't say.
and I'm saying that the real number is actually a lot larger because it doesn't take into account.
It might be
all of the people who are unofficially on the payroll, and to come up with this absurd idea that the President of the United States is uninformed. No, actually, trust me, he's very much informed. And you can be sure that the reason why the video that he showed in the White House did not show Ramaphosa saying similar things.
To let him off the hook.
To let him off the hook. And at the same time, he could have brought up Steenhuisen's tweets. And again, he let Steenhuisen off the hook.
Yep.
He could have brought up Lamola, who said similar things.
Yep.
And again, he let him off the hook because he understands how to actually play out these things on the international stage.
And you're absolutely right.
Better than anyone else.
Right, exactly. And that's what I've said. In all these lies about it being an ambush, they requested the meeting. Trump graciously gave it to him. And then Ramaphosa made Trump wait 30 minutes. He was on West Africa time. What is that all about? That was just so rude and disrespectful. So no, the thing is, you're absolutely right. And that's what I said from the outset. As I analyzed it that day, as it unfolded and afterwards, and I've told people since then. And this is why I need to write a thing for the Daily Friend. I haven't had a chance to do it yet. If Trump wanted to embarrass him, I don't know what Trump knows about South Africa. He can keep his America. We'll keep our South Africa. Vaccine apartheid. While we're giving $711 million to Aspen Pharmacare to manufacture vaccines, which they never did, by the way. And then he runs around. We could have just taken the minister from this past 2 weeks. They said, well, if people don't like BE, they can invest in India. Oh, okay. Or we could have, as you said, put all these people could embarrass. But what did he do? He put video up of people who are no longer in the ANC to give Ramaphosa a chance to distance himself and disavow it and say that you're right, it's wrong, we should do something. But no, he comes back to South Africa, and what does he say? We are not going to arrest anybody because this is free speech. But you can't show the Union flag, which has nothing to do with apartheid. It's a hate symbol, a flag that was created for reconciliation between the Boers and the English after the Anglo-Boer War in the early part of the 20th century. That's a symbol of hate. Give me a break.
Chris, remember, I'm still fighting a long legal battle with the Human Rights Commission because I referred to myself using the Arab word for an infidel.
Yep.
Okay, it's not. I haven't used the word on anyone else. I called myself one. And
well, and
they've charged me with hate speech.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm not to out you, but I do believe you're an atheist. If I'm not mistaken, that would that would be.
I am, and
well,
by definition,
that
yes.
would make you that by definition.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yes.
100% correct.
Yeah, and more importantly, that is the term that gets used in India by Muslims to distinguish themselves from Hindus.
100%.
To this day.
I'm reading a book from World War I about the South African force that went into German Southwest Africa, and that word is throughout the book, from written in the 1930s. You know, governments that have to regulate speech are not legitimate. If you're afraid of words, you're not legitimate. Sorry.
Well, you see, to that point, that's one reason why I'm one of those who says that you should allow Julius Malema to continue doing that. And the reason why you should is because I'd rather it be out in the open than driven underground into private WhatsApp groups and so forth. That's always been the case. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
100%.
Trying to police it opens up the thin edge of the wedge for government to then start policing other forms of speech. I'm a freedom of speech fundamentalist at this level. You know, I think that I would much rather that if there are Nazis in my midst, I want to be able to identify them so that I can actually arm myself and take proper precautions if I see them approaching me under particular circumstances. And I think that everyone really needs to be taking that approach. You know, forewarned is forearmed. But to your point, there was an opportunity that was handed to Ramaphosa to say, President Trump, my country has freedom of speech. These are not the views of my government. And in as much as I personally find it distasteful, and I completely reject any of the utterances that he's up to, our Constitutional Court has ruled that he may continue with it. That's all he needed to do.
Yep.
To actually look presidential, and he lost the opportunity.
Yeah, because he was befuddled. I mean, you know, and how the guy didn't even realize how stupid he looked saying that. Again, I think the guy who came off the best in that entire situation was Parks Tao, because he didn't say anything. He was smart. I'm not a fan of his with his 3% black tax, grifting, you know, and putting money into this slush fund. But he was the only guy that had his head not up his rectum there. Steenhuisen was, you know, that, oh my gosh, you know, look, he may have thought that worked in the Oval Office, but domestically that was disastrous when Steenhuisen said, oh, no. See, we joined this government so these radicals won't be in power. I'm sorry, but all their policies are being implemented while you're part of the government of national unity. Bella, 3% black tax, national health insurance, expropriation without compensation, farm murders are continuing. White South Africans are being accosted on the streets of Parklands and Milnerton and Cape Town. I mean, that's
AfriForum being charged with treason.
Come on. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so should we charge the ANC with treason for running abroad and for begging for sanctions in Washington and London and Berlin, or Bonn, it wasn't Berlin then, back in the 1980s? Come on, stupid. You know, these people are beyond belief. It's like the obsession with Orania. Get over it. It's a company town. Get over it. It's a bunch of nonsense. No, a huge opportunity was missed and wasted there. Mostly, I would argue, Kanthan, because of the ignorance. They don't know how to read the room, the ignorance. I mean, and it frustrates me because I know ANC policy people are watching my videos. I know they are because I have too many indications and I've heard from too many people that know better. I mean, Kasatu contacted me and asked to do an interview. I did an interview with Kasatu. Imagine that was with Matthew Parks. It was a pretty good interview. But, you know, when Rob Hersoff, before he went to the States for his tour of all these media outlets and podcasts, he did a video which he exhorted President Trump to take some steps to help, rebalance what's going on in South Africa from the outside. And one of them, in interest of full disclosure, Rob, I actually knew this before he did it because I spent Easter with him and his family. He recommended that they create a special envoy for minority rights, and he said he mentioned me. Well, thank you for that, Rob. I appreciate that. I'm still not convinced the Trump administration knows who I am, although actually they do now. But then I did a video from the Western Cape a few days before I left, in which I implored the delegation going to America not to lecture President Trump, not to do certain things. And they did everything I said not to do. It was a total disaster. And the media trying to cover for them, saying it was an ambush, is comical.
So I think that had they stuck to that script, as you had suggested, that video would not have been played. And the point,
I think you're right, because he didn't come out with it. He held it until they acted like fools.
Yes, and until they said, we're going to try and persuade the president. He said, no, hang on a second, and then he pulls out the pile of paper, and he says, and of course the dim the lights meme is going to be forever with us.
Is Natalie here? Can we dim the lights? Nobody knows who Natalie is, but she's famous now, kind of like Karen. Now we got Natalie's famous. Good Lord, that was too funny.
Yeah, so I think, to the point that he would not have actually played the video if Ramaphosa had just stuck to the script. And I still don't know what went on behind the scenes in terms of their discussions outside of the public gaze. And I guess I'd like to think that there's still back and forth going on between the Trump administration and Ramaphosa's government. And where is it going to play itself out? Well, it's going to go one of two ways. Either there's going to be a G20 that Ramaphosa presides over that does not have U.S. participation, and that effectively sees South Africa kicked out of the G20. Because remember, South Africa is in the G20 because at the time that it got into the G20, it was one of the 20 biggest economies in the world.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, for more than a decade now, we've fallen off, and so South Africa's presence right now in the G20 is just a perfunctory nod to the continent.
Just like South Africa's participation in BRICS, it's a rounding error.
Yeah, exactly. And so between now and then, if there's a possibility that the Government of National Unity actually gets their act together, then you could very well have a turnaround with the US actually deciding to participate in the G20. And, frankly, it's a very simple thing to do. Just get rid of all race-based legislation and things will go back to normal. Really, it is as simple as that.
Because, yeah, that's true, but there will need to be some repair done to infrastructure. Education's got to be fixed, but all of that will generate right. But that'll fix the relationship. Yeah,
but the relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, you're right.
Is going to be entirely dependent on South Africa actually instituting a meritocracy.
Yep.
Because if there's a single thing that defines what the Trump administration is all about, it's that one word, meritocracy.
Yeah, I just want to very quickly to my moderators here, very quickly. So moderators, Michael Holmes is back in the chat. I haven't seen Michael for a long time. Michael said, thankfully, Trump only has 4 years. There's no reason to censor and remove his message based on that, whoever removed it. Don't give him a timeout. I mean, you shouldn't do that. That's free speech. I encourage free speech. Now, if someone's abusive, that's a different story. But Michael Holmes just expressed a view. He doesn't like Trump. He said, thankfully, most of my audience would disagree with that. Don't attack Michael. That's his opinion. I mean, let's let it in there. Now, we want a fine line with this because we know when people start trolling, but there's no reason to censor Michael's comment to saying, thankfully, Trump will be gone in 4 years. That's his prerogative. I think you'd agree with me, Kanthan.
Yeah, 100%. And, I'd be interested to know in terms of why this person is thankful that he'll be gone in 4 years.
Because he's a leftist.
Yeah, because frankly, right now, by every conceivable measure, the U.S. is significantly better off than it was just a couple of months ago. So inflation levels are down to their lowest levels. If I look in terms of the hiccup around the U.S. stock market, starting on April 2nd, and suddenly it soared past those dips. And if I look in terms of my U.S. stock portfolio, everything is sitting in the green. It's absolutely brilliant.
Same here.
So, yeah. So, yeah,
there's one more thing here too. Look, I mean, it's not a one-off, because April's usually a month where the government takes in more. You know what? We don't have surpluses in many months, but April's usually a month of surpluses because people are paying their due tax bills by April 15th. But we had the second highest budget surplus in April of this year in history, $258 billion surplus in April, in the midst of an economic crisis that the media is trying to tell us about. It's utter nonsense. And this is with the tariffs being implemented.
Well, but the crucial thing is that, remember that when the tariffs were first implemented, in Trump's first term, Biden kept all of those tariffs in place.
Yep.
Why? Because they work.
Yeah.
And none of your media on that side of the world has actually been pointing this out to people. That's the reason why it's there. It's because they actually end up working. And of course, the most crucial thing, Chris, is the price of eggs.
Oh my goodness! I saw that on Twitter today. This leftist lunatic. Republicans were so concerned about the price of eggs. No, we weren't. We were concerned about the price of everything with the inflation. The government lying and saying it's 7% when it's more like 40% in 1 year. I mean, everything I buy costs 200% and 300% of what it cost a couple of years ago. But you know what I did when eggs went from $3 a carton to $15 a carton? You know what my response was, Kanthan?
You went out and got some chickens.
Well, that's a good response, but I can't pull that off in my local residential area because I get fined. I simply stopped eating eggs. Oh, what a concept. Wait for the price come down. Lower the demand when the price comes down. By the way, the reason eggs cost that much wasn't just Joe Biden's idiotic energy policies, which drove up inflation across the board. It was also because the Department of Agriculture slaughtered 20 million hens. So we had no hens laying eggs because of a bogus bird flu allegation. It's like
we've had exactly the same idiotic scenario playing itself out right here in South Africa a couple of years ago, where they went out and came up with this bird flu thing and insisted on slaughtering chickens, and it was an utter disaster.
Yep, and now you've also got this. Now this is a real concern; it's genuine, but you've got this situation where South Africa can't contain foot and mouth disease. That's a major problem, and it's broke out in Gauteng now, and that's a serious issue. I mean, the Botswana. So when I lived in Botswana, you would have cattle rustlers from Zimbabwe who would come over, and from the Bulawayo area along the border there in Hwange National Park up in the northwest, they would rustle cattle from Botswana, and the Botswana authorities, if the cattle got to the border, they didn't want them again. They just compensated.
No, for sure,
because they're going to get foot and mouth, and Botswana was a foot and mouth free zone, and they didn't want to bring them back. So they had a very smart approach to this from a veterinary standpoint. But I mean, Botswana beef is very important to them. They export a lot of beef to the European Union, and they couldn't afford to lose that. But South Africa has these episodic foot and mouth outbreaks, and we got another one right now going on. It's deadly for agriculture.
No, absolutely, but I think it's a good time to actually recognize that the Botswana government generally has their head screwed on right, by and large.
Well, now that Eric Masisi's gone, it is getting back to normal, but it is being run by socialists. But so far, they've not been wackadoodles. I'll give them credit.
Yeah, well, certainly, everything is relative in this part of the world, and if you draw comparison between them and I think the single thing that you could use as a measure is all of the countries, the surrounding countries, have ended up adopting Starlink.
Except South Africa.
Except South Africa, because
Swaziland.
And
Zimbabwe.
You get these EFF shills who talk about the fact that using Starlink would be a security link for South Africa. Guess what, risk? Guys? The internet
is a security risk.
Is a security risk. Okay, it was formed by DARPA.
Yeah, so I got to tell you,
it's a Defense Department project. Yeah.
Advanced Research Project Agency, yeah. No, I get a kick out of this, Kanthan, because, I get attacked all the time. You should have seen some of the idiotic comments on the GJ Sabu channel when I did a conversation there. People saying things just, the one I love is, look at this white YouTuber, lecturing black South Africans. I didn't lecture anybody. I simply had a conversation, and I'm not a YouTuber. I'm a historian, a political scientist, an intelligence analyst, yada, yada, yada. I got a whole CV that's 14 pages long. It's funny. I get people kill me. They're like, well, I don't have a YouTube account because they'll be able to find me. Dude, you're on the internet. I can find you. And guess what? If you're not on the internet, I can still find you. Public records are all online everywhere around the world. I can find you. I can find you. It's not hard. I worked at the National Security Agency. We developed these programs. You think you're secure? You're not secure. It's impossible to hide anymore. Try walking around the UK. You're on 1 million cameras everywhere you go. You think you're gonna knock boots with that chica in the woods there in the Sherwood Forest? There's a camera on that oak tree. Oh my goodness, that's people just don't understand. They don't realize how much of a surveillance role we have. Now, to be fair, much of Africa is still a gray zone, a black zone with the surveillance. But if you go anywhere near the internet, it's like people like I don't use the internet because I want my bank account to be secure. Your bank account is online. Banks do a poor job securing your data. We have these data breaches all the time because people are anyway. So I just find it comical that people just think that they're actually discreet and hidden. They're not.
Got kind of thrown for a second because the clock behind you said 11:11, and there was just a string of lines stretching across there.
Oh, that's actually that's computer code. That's my surveillance device. That's
the conspiracy theories are going to be forthcoming at this
point.
Chris.
Absolutely. Well, people are always saying I work for the CIA. It's true. I work for Chris in Africa. Anyway, should we wrap it up here, or do you want to go a little bit longer?
I think we can wrap it up at this point, and and let's try and not keep as much of a gap between this conversation and the next one. But yeah, like I said, to start off this thing, I've done this deep drill down into the costs of BEE, and if people don't mind lots of figures, very detailed figures in terms of how the calculations are done, go to kanthanpillay.com and check it out. And I've got a chart right there on, at the top of the story that just shows a line like this in terms of GDP if we have BEE, and a line like that if we don't.
Well, folks can check out Kanthan on kanthanpillay.com if I'm not mistaken. I believe that's the correct address. Also, check out the Overton podcast. But before I finish up this conversation, somebody just mentioned that's why people keep money stuffed in couches. Paula. Oh, that's good. That's excellent. Also, Kanthan, I don't know if I'm letting the cat out of the bag or not. You don't have to answer this question, but are you participating in the Truth Report? Is that something you'll be involved in? We'll be able to find any content from you over there?
Well, on the Truth Report per se, I'm a supporter of the project at large, and you and I have been on the WhatsApp group since the get-go. But seriously, I think it's and look, kudos to Rob herself for pulling that together. I think it's a much-needed initiative. That the role that I end up playing in these things, the time that I end up allocating to the media space is kind of few and far between. Yeah. And so, just at that level, John and I do the Overton pod every 2 weeks because, frankly, that's all the time that we have to allocate for it. And fortunately, you and I, our conversations are, at least a couple of months apart, so it's not too much trouble. So I doubt I'll be directly involved with Truth Report, but certainly I'll be holding up my hand at a point at which I think I'll be useful, but I think it's an important initiative and I want to see it succeed. So let's see how it goes.
Well, in the meantime, folks can find you at the Overton Podcast on YouTube and also at kanthanpillay.com, and they should check it out. Folks, Kanthan is not a guest. This is our segment. This is Iconic with Kanthan and Chris. So it wasn't interviewing. That if you're new to the program, which a lot of people are, we've had over 1,000 people tune in for this one, which is high for us. The last time I think we did this is before the big surge of my channel. So it's good to see these large audiences, but it's not an interview. This is our conversation. It's not maybe as erudite or as elevated as Jonathan Witt and Kanthan. Maybe because I'm just a farm boy. But anyway, but Kanthan, thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure, and have a good evening, and we'll chat again soon.
Always great talking to you, Chris. Have a good one.
All right, so I'll let Kanthan drop off, and then I'll wrap this up, folks. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. This has been the Iconic program with Kanthan Pillay and Chris Wyatt. As Kanthan correctly said early in the broadcast, we're on the cusp of 100,000 subscribers. but we're still short, folks. It's been a slow day at growing subscribers. We're currently at 99,642. We need another 358 subscribers to hit that magical 100,000 subscriber mark, which is pretty exciting, especially when you put in context that on December 31st, the channel had 20,352 or 58 subscribers. Really thankful that everyone's joined us. You hear great content, fantastic conversations with the likes of people like Steve Hofmeyer, Ernst von Sale, Ernst Rutz, Peter Grunewald, and then, of course, Kanthan Pillay, Vena Dutoy, a whole bunch of interesting people, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson on the program. We try to bring you interesting things as often as possible, and I do appreciate your support for the channel. Be sure to hit the like button, folks. If you want, leave a comment behind. And again, there was no need to censor Michael Holmes' comment unless he said something rude before that I didn't. He has a difference of opinion. He's entitled to it on this program. If people did delete refugee questions, thank you for that. This wasn't a refugee session. All right, I'm probably going to start doing a weekly refugee broadcast just to focus on that, and maybe that'll tamp down everybody trying to glom onto everything else. Thanks a lot, everybody. That's going to wrap it up for today. Appreciate your support. Have a lovely day. I'll be back on in 45 minutes for the news, and I may have an interview with Jack Miller. I'm waiting for confirmation. If it is, I'll put it out there, but probably not today. It'll probably be on Friday now. All right, folks, that's it. Take care of yourselves and treat others well. That's the best you can do in life. All right. Cheers. And where is my closing credits? This is so funny. I have a hard time finding this so many times. Still not finding it. Wow, that's crazy. So you guys are stuck with me for a second while I try. There they are. They're hiding. Cheers, everybody. Thanks, Kanthan.